Nowadays, sequels aren't only expected, but planned well in advance. To cut down on costs, sometimes multiple sequels are actually filmed at the same time. This is the case with a lot of movies, like the last two Back to the Futures, the last two Matrix films, and the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. In the case of the Toxic Avenger, both parts 2 and 3 were filmed at the same time, but not intentionally. Initially, Lloyd Kaufman only wanted to make one movie, but they shot way more footage than they expected. Rather than condensing all that footage into one film, Lloyd was convinced to simply re-edit the whole thing into 2 movies. It's why parts 2 and 3 have the same look and the same actors, and also explains why The Last Temptation of Toxie turned out the way it did. In part 3, Toxie has just rid Tromaville of Apocalypse and has now returned to keep evil off the streets. However, we once again find Toxie depressed because there's not enough work for a monster superhero. Toxie gets a letter informing him and Claire of a breakthrough in advanced technology that could restore her sight, at a hefty price.
$357,000?
Having no more bad guys to kill, Toxie goes out looking for a job.
Hello, the tax man's here. Hey! Oh, what? Hey! Stop it! Sir, here, I got the tapes you wanted.
Oh, they Gott in Himmel!
You know, every time you touch the tapes, they melt. I told you 1,000 times, don't touch the tapes. Look what you done.
This is the 6th time you've moved the tapes. Let me reconnect these 2 little wires. Hey, what's that smell?
When nothing works, Toxie goes for an interview with Apocalypse, and based on a nice starting salary, the exact same amount Claire needs for her eye operation, he signs a contract in blood. The other thing I shouldn't have to point out if you saw the second movie is, after all that Apocalypse did, why would Toxie consider working for them? As a superhero, you would think he would be obligated to set an example for the people of Tromaville. The general thought is that it's Troma, so they don't need an explanation, but I think the reason for this had a lot to do with the way the story was rearranged. I believe in the original story, Toxie was supposed to sign up with Apocalypse before knowing they were evil. When the movie begins, we're also led to believe that most of Part 3 is happening as a flashback, so maybe this is taking place before Part 2. I don't know, and I don't think it was planned. At this point, the movie goes through a dull pace. It tries to be funny as we watch Toxie become a corrupt yuppie, going around wearing suits and playing tennis. It makes several biblical references, which are pretty heavy for a film like this.
All these things I will give thee, if thou will fall down and work for me. Work for me.
But they're hard to take seriously because the acting is beyond atrocious, and you're not meant to take any of it seriously. Eventually, Toxie realizes what a toxic douchebag he was being, and he quits Apocalypse to regain the people's trust. It's only then that we find out that the evil chairman of Apocalypse is none other than...
Totally confused. Oh, the devil!
Yes, I'm not making this up. Toxie was actually being tempted by Satan.
You are one ugly amphibian!
At first, the devil lets Toxie choose his arena for the final battle, but then comes to the conclusion that since Toxie plays video games, that each match should essentially reflect a level of the fictional arcade game, 5 Levels of Doom. It's hokey, and it seems to drag on forever. You just want to see these two duke it out, and instead we're subjected to all of the devil's tricks. He sets Toxie on fire, drowns him, buries him in the dirt, uses wind to throw him up a hill, where Toxie has to rescue a bus full of helpless school children.
I can't do this, I'm not Superman!
And finally reduces him to his weak human self. Claire goes to look for Toxie's contract and discovers an escape clause that can only be activated by the Divine One himself. Toxie reverts back to his monstrous form and finally kills the devil once and for all. The concept isn't bad, having the superhero succumb to evil to save his loved one, but in the case of this movie, it isn't executed well. I'm torn between liking Part 3 and hating it. I can't say it's a good movie, and it's definitely the most comical in the series, and by comical, the jokes feel like they were written by kindergartners. It's definitely got some of the most violent scenes in the series, but then it has the least amount of action. Aside from the opening scene in the video store and the fight with Satan at the end, There are no other fight scenes. Again, I think a lot of that has to do with how the initial story was broken up into 2 movies. That's the problem with a lot of novels that get adapted into multiple films. Usually it's overkill, and it can be resolved by making a tighter movie to begin with. Toxie 3 is no exception. The movie they set out to make might have been an exceptional sequel had they just compromised and made one movie. Can you imagine a film where Toxie goes to Japan, comes back to fight an evil corporation, and then fights the devil at the end? Yeah, it's a weird premise, but not something that requires 2 films to be made. As a Toxie fan, I accept it, but I can see why a lot of people wouldn't even give this one a glance, and I can't say I'd blame them.